Today I'll be speaking to you about totalitarianism, examples in history, and how it relates to the novel Animal Farm by George Orwell. Totalitarianism, in short, is a system of government that is controlled by one person or one party. On the surface, this may seem to be the same thing as a dictatorship, but they differ in a few important ways. In a dictatorship, a country is ruled over by a single person who is content to just controlling the politics and the military. Totalitarianism differs in that the government controls everything. When living under totalitarian rule, you have no freedom or agency. The government decides everything for you. The government making choices for you extends to everything. They choose your career, they choose what news you hear, they even choose your religion if they don't ban religion altogether. They also choose what you say, usually by claiming any dissent towards the government is treason and execute the dissenters. The government is also centralized. This means that everything in the country at some point goes through the government. For example, people who farm food are forced to give it to the government, who then rations the food out to the citizenry or sells it to other countries. To put in simple criteria, for a government to be totalitarian, it needs to be A. Ruled over by one person, B. Removed all freedom from the citizens, C. Be centralized. Before I try to show you that Animal Farm meets this criteria, let's test it out with a few governments that have been unanimously labeled as totalitarian, namely Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia. First, we will be looking at Nazi Germany. So does Nazi Germany fit the criteria that I laid out? Well, everything was governed by its chancellor, Adolf Hitler, so that's a check. What about the removal of freedom from the citizenry? Well, many of its able-bodied citizens were drafted into the German military, and those who weren't drafted were forced into other jobs that existed only to maintain the country or to produce weapons for the war. Not to mention, Hitler banned all alternative media outlets, leaving only the mainstream media, which was controlled by the government. Not to mention the fact that anyone who wasn't a Christian was put into concentration camps, and for most of them, executed. So we can check that off. Well, what about the government being centralized? Well, as mentioned before, the media was controlled by the government. They also had universal health care and an education for the native populations and its children. And both of those were paid for by the government, so that's also centralized government. Also, to showcase decentralization even more, the education plan was created by the government. So you can check off centralized government for Nazi Germany. So it seems like the criteria works, but that's just one government. Let's see how it works with Russia. There was a period in time in Soviet Russia where Russia was ruled in part by Stalin and later entirely ruled by Stalin. Most of the evidence I use for Russia being totalitarian comes from this time. So, check. But what about freedom, or lack thereof? Well, for starters, let's look at the reason why Russia had such a low unemployment rate at the time. Most of the citizenry didn't choose their jobs, they got placed into them. Also, people couldn't own land, have a business, or practice religion, as in any religion, hence the godless part of godless communist. And if you think about it, the fact that people had to work without pay makes them slaves in a way. Also, freedom of speech was limited because Stalin had anyone who dissented or could possibly oppose him in the future executed. So we can check off lack of freedom. Well, what about the government being centralized? Well, I am tempted to point out the whole communist thing, but I'm going to go into more detail about that. For starters, we can look at the ration system Russia had. All the food farmed was owned by the state, which they then rationed it out to the citizenry or sold to other countries for goods. Also, all the land in Russia was owned by Russia. The education was completely controlled by the government. Anything and everything you could possibly need was provided to you by the government. If that doesn't scream centralized government, I don't know what does. So that's two for the criteria working. Now let's see if it works for Animal Farm. It is possible to just point out that Animal Farm was supposed to be an analogy for Stalinist Russia and leave it there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the totalitarian traits of Russia were translated into the book. Well, Napoleon has complete control over everything. He gained complete control by first exiling Snowball, as evident on page 53. The dogs dashed straight for Snowball, who only sprang from his place just in time to escape their snapping jaws. He exiled him by having the dogs chase him out, then had Squealer convince the animals that Snowball was a traitor. Then after he announced to the animals that from now on the Sunday morning meetings will come to an end. This removes agency from the animals, making it possible for that they have no choice as to what work they would do. But he's not officially in charge at this point. In future, all questions relating to the working on the farm will be settled by a special committee of pigs presided over by himself. Now he is in control. He is in charge of the group that controls Animal Farm. Now we can check off the first criteria. So what about the citizenry not having freedom? On page 55, Squealer says Napoleon would only be too happy to let you make decisions for yourself, but sometimes you might make the wrong decisions, comrades, and then where would you be? Squealer just admitted that the other animals do not have the ability to make decisions. Not being able to make their own decisions is the removal of freedom, because in essence, agency, the ability to make choices, is freedom. And it's not just them being told they have no choices either. There is a point in the book where Napoleon ordered the chickens to give up their eggs and to be sold. The hens retaliated by hanging up to the rafters and there lay their eggs, which smashed into pieces on the floor. In response, Napoleon ordered for their reactions to be cut. He also later had the chickens that instigated the revolt executed for conspiracy. He did not let the chickens make the choice to not give their eggs by actively punishing their dissent and retaliation. There was also another thing that the animals chased out Moses to reason, who clearly he was meant to be a symbol of religion. When the animals revolted against the farmer, they also chased out Moses, getting rid of religion. Because there's no religion on the farm, the freedom to practice it was also removed. So yes, the freedom has been taken from the citizenry. So now we're at 2 out of 3. So what about the government being centralized? As mentioned before, there is a ration system. The pigs, who are effectively the government, would collect all the food, ration some of it to the animals, sell supposedly a small portion of it, and store what was supposedly the majority. It was announced later when bricks and timber had been purchased, a schoolroom would be built in the farmhouse. This is centralized government because it is the government that is making the school, and it was later mentioned that Napoleon would lay out the entire learning plan. So as you can see, the government is centralized. So with all 3 marks of the criteria met, we can quite clearly see that the farm in Animal Farm is totalitarian.